Hey guys, how's it going? This is our next installment in our U.S. history class. So we're going to look now at the year 1970 up to the year 2020, and we're going to focus mostly on U.S. presidents and then cover some other important events from the last couple of decades. We're going to start by looking at Richard Nixon, the 37th president. He was president from 1969 to 1974. Nixon was president when American astronauts Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong landed on the moon in July of 1960. Nixon was the second Quaker president. If you may remember a few weeks ago I said that Herbert Hoover was the first. The controversial Roe v. Wade Supreme Court decision, which legalized abortion nationwide, was handed down during Nixon's second term in office, and we're going to talk more about that here in a few minutes. Nixon's second term in office was tarnished by the Watergate scandal. When it became apparent that Nixon was likely to be impeached and removed from office, in August 1974 he resigned from office, the only president ever to do so. So the Watergate scandal, people working for Nixon's re-election campaign in 1972 had burglarized the Democratic headquarters of the Watergate Hotel. And at first it looked like Nixon himself wasn't involved in this burglary, but it became known later that Nixon himself was actually involved, and he was going to be getting in big trouble for his involvement, so that's why he chose to go ahead and step down from office. Here's a picture of Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon had been Dwight Eisenhower's vice president back in the 1950s, and he had run for president in 1960 and had been defeated by John F. Kennedy. All right, the 38th president, Gerald Ford, he was president from 1974 to 1977. One of Ford's first acts as president was to grant former President Nixon a full pardon. And that made some people mad. Some people thought that Nixon should be held responsible for what he had done wrong. But Ford said he wanted to pardon Nixon, to just put it behind the country so that we could get on and put Watergate behind us. In college, Ford had been an All-American football star. And before he chose to go to law school, he'd actually been offered a contract to play professional football. So his life could have been very different had he chosen to go that route. Ford was the only man to ever serve as president who was never elected. So Richard Nixon's vice president, Spiro Agnew, resigned. He had gotten in some trouble himself. And when Spiro Agnew resigned, Nixon appointed Ford as his new vice president. And then when Nixon resigned, Ford became the president. So he's the only man to ever become president who never was elected by the people. The Vietnam conflict was officially brought to a close during Ford's administration in 1975. In 1980, Ronald Reagan asked Ford to be his running mate, but Ford declined. That would have been interesting for a former president to become a vice president. That would have been kind of odd. Ford was a member of the Episcopal Church. And here's a picture of Gerald Ford. Next on the list is Jimmy Carter. He was the 39th president. He was president from 1977 to 1981. Carter, the first member of his family to ever graduate from high school, had formerly been a peanut farmer in Georgia. As governor of Georgia, Carter pushed hard for racial integration. He championed racial equality as the governor of Georgia. As president, Carter rarely used limousines. He sold the presidential yacht and often carried his own luggage when traveling. So he took a much more common man approach to the presidency. He didn't try to make it as luxurious and cushioned of an office. Carter, this is an interesting fact, Carter was the first president ever born in a hospital. Every president prior to that had been born at home, which of course was pretty typical 100 years ago. But almost all babies today are born at hospitals. Carter gave a presidential pardon to conscientious objectors who had dodged the Vietnam draft. A lot of people didn't agree with the Vietnam conflict, the Vietnam War, and so they had tried to get out of serving in the war after they'd been drafted. And a lot of people got in trouble for that. And Carter granted pardon to these people because he believed it was time to just put that era behind us as Americans. I think it was the right decision. Elvis Presley died shortly after Carter became president. Carter issued a statement saying Presley had, quote, permanently changed the face of American popular culture. Carter's been very active in public life since leaving the presidency, receiving the Nobel Peace Prize in 2002. Carter was a member of the Southern Baptist Church. Since leaving office, he's affiliated with the New Baptist Covenant. And at age 95, Carter holds the record for the longest-lived president in U.S. history. No other president has ever lived as long as Jimmy Carter. That's Jimmy Carter. The next president, Ronald Reagan, the 40th president, he was president from 1981 to 1989. Reagan had been an actor in Hollywood before getting into politics. And starting in 1937, he appeared in more than 50 films, so he had quite a long film career as a young man. Reagan was a Democrat until 1962, when he switched to become a Republican. Reagan had been the governor of California before becoming president. At the time, in 1981, when he became president, Reagan was the oldest man ever elected. He was 69 years old when he took office. Donald Trump broke that record in 2016 by being elected at age 70. Reagan's economic policy was commonly nicknamed Reaganomics. Reagan survived an assassination attempt in 1981, and Reagan was a member of the Presbyterian Church USA. This is a picture of Reagan. Reagan was a pretty popular president. He was president when I was born, and my earliest memories of watching the news, I remember seeing Reagan on TV giving speeches. George Bush was the 41st president of the U.S. He was president from 1989 to 1993. Sometimes you hear him today referred to as George H.W. Bush to distinguish himself from his son. So some fun facts about George Bush. He had been the captain of the baseball team at Yale University back in the day. Before becoming president, Bush had been the director of the CIA, as well as vice president under Ronald Reagan. Bush was also a veteran of World War II. To date, he is the last president to have served in combat during wartime. Bush was president when the Berlin Wall fell in 1989, signaling the end of communism in Germany. The Persian Gulf War occurred during Bush's time in office. The Persian Gulf War, what happened, Iraq had invaded the country of Kuwait, and America came to Kuwait's defense, and in an effort to drive Iraq out of their country. The Persian Gulf War is sometimes also referred to as Operation Desert Storms. The president of Iraq at the time was Saddam Hussein, and his name is going to come up a little bit later as we discuss the Iraq War from 2003. Bush's campaign promise in 1988 had been no new taxes. When taxes went up during his administration, this was used against him by his opponents. I still remember the commercials in 1992. No new taxes. They played that clip over and over again. When Barbara Bush died in 2018, she and George Bush had been married for 73 years, making the Bushes the longest married presidential couple in history. And Bush was a member of the Episcopal Church. Here's a picture of George Bush. All right, the 42nd president, Bill Clinton, was president from 1993 to 2001. Clinton was the first president who was part of the baby boomer generation. The baby boom generation refers to the fact that shortly after World War II, a lot of babies were born. Soldiers were finally able to come home, and they were able to get married, they were able to start families. And so a lot of babies were born in the years right after World War II. That's why people born in that era are called the baby boomers. In the 1992 election, independent candidate Ross Perot took 19% of the vote, which inadvertently helped Clinton defeat Bush. Clinton was proficient on the saxophone and once played on the Arsenio Hall show. Before becoming president, Clinton had been governor of Arkansas. Elected in 1978, he was the state's youngest governor at the time. Clinton was president during the 1994 Rwandan genocide. Clinton ignored repeated pleas from Rwanda to come intervene. Years later, Clinton would visit Rwanda and apologize. In 1998, Clinton became only the second president to ever be impeached. You may remember a few weeks ago we talked about Andrew Johnson, who was the first president to ever be impeached. But just like in the case with Johnson, there were not enough votes in Congress to remove Clinton from office. Remember, the word impeach doesn't mean getting kicked out of office, it just means being put on trial. Clinton was a member of the Southern Baptist Church, though he later left the denomination. This is a picture of Bill Clinton. All right, the next president, George W. Bush. He was president from 2001 to 2009. Before becoming president, he had been governor of Texas. He's only the second man in history to become president whose father had also been president. The first father-son duo was John Adams, second president, and John Quincy Adams, the sixth president. And the second case of that was George Bush, who was the 41st president, and George W. Bush, who was the 43rd president. He was president on September the 11th, 2001, when terrorists destroyed the World Trade Center in New York City. He sent troops to Iraq to topple the regime of Saddam Hussein, arguing that Iraq was harboring weapons of mass destruction. No weapons of mass destruction were ever found by the American military. Bush also argued that Iraq had some sort of involvement in the September 11th attack, although there was no connection between Iraq and the attack was ever established. Bush became the fourth president to win the presidential election, although he lost the popular vote. The first time that it happened was John Quincy Adams in 1824. Rutherford B. Hayes was the second in 1876. Benjamin Harrison in 1888, and then George W. Bush in 2000. Al Gore won more votes than Bush, but Bush received more electoral votes. Bush was a member of the United Methodist Church. This is a picture of George W. Bush. The 44th president was Barack Obama. He was president from 2009 to 2017. Obama's father, Barack Obama Sr., was a native of Kenya. Before becoming president, Obama had been an Illinois senator. Barack and Michelle Obama were the first black president and first lady of the United States. This is a picture of Barack Obama and Michelle Obama, first lady. When Obama took office in 2009, America was going through an economic recession that was the worst since the Great Depression in the 1930s. Obama's signature piece of legislation was the Affordable Health Care Act, commonly referred to as Obamacare. Obama identifies himself as a Protestant Christian, but isn't affiliated with any denomination. All right, the 45th president, Donald Trump, has been president from 2017 up to the present. And before becoming president, he was famous as a real estate mogul, a very famous, wealthy real estate mogul, and he'd also had dabbled in the entertainment industry. The Plaza Hotel in New York City is featured in the classic Christmas movie Home Alone 2, which came out in 1992. Trump, who owned the hotel at the time, has a brief cameo in the film. Kevin is walking into the hotel and he's asking where the front desk is, and Trump points him to the desk. In 2004, Trump began hosting the reality TV show The Apprentice and would go on to host for 14 seasons. In 2016, Trump became only the fifth president in history to win the election while losing the popular vote. And I mentioned the others where that happened a few minutes ago. Hillary Clinton won more popular votes in 2016, but Trump won more electoral votes. Trump's 2016 campaign centered on stricter immigration law enforcement and building a wall on the Mexico-U.S. border to prevent illegal immigrants from crossing the border. In 2020, Trump attended and gave a speech at the March for Life in Washington, D.C., the first sitting president to ever attend. The March for Life is a large rally held every year by people trying to raise awareness about the sanctity of human life, particularly the sanctity of life in the womb. They always hold this rally on the anniversary of Roe versus Wade, which legalized abortion, which made it legal for babies to be killed in the womb. And the March for Life is designed to help raise awareness about how wrong it is for babies to be killed in the womb, that their life, even though they're still in the womb, is still precious in God's sight. Trump is only the second president to donate his entire presidential salary to charity. Herbert Hoover, we learned a few weeks ago, was the first man to do that. Trump identifies as a Presbyterian, and this is a picture of Trump. All right, we're going to look now at some important events of the 2000s and the 2010s. The September 11th attacks, which I mentioned a while ago, were a series of 4 coordinated terrorist attacks by the Islamic terrorist group Al-Qaeda on the United States on the morning of Tuesday, September 11th, 2001. The attacks killed 2,996 people injured over 6,000 others, and caused at least $10 billion in infrastructure and property damage. To memorialize the event, Alan Jackson performed his poignant "Where Were You When the World Stopped Turning" at the 2001 Country Music Association Awards. And this is a picture of Alan Jackson introducing this very poignant song for the occasion. The Iraq War was a conflict that began on March 20th, 2003, with the invasion of Iraq by a United States-led coalition that overthrew the government of Saddam Hussein. The conflict continued for much of the next decade as an insurgency emerged to oppose the occupying forces and the post-invasion Iraqi government. An estimated 150,000 to 600,000 or more Iraqis were killed in the first 3 to 4 years of conflict. Now, I mentioned a few weeks ago that the last time Congress actually declared war was in 1941 to get America involved in World War II. So the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the Persian Gulf War, the Iraq War, these have all been undeclared wars. And for that reason, I think they were all mistaken, because I think the Constitution, which specifies that only Congress can declare war, needs to be followed. I think it's dangerous to have the military involved in long-term operations without an official congressional declaration of war. On June 24th, 2005, Billy Graham held his final evangelistic crusade. Held at Flushing Meadows Corona Park in New York City, the 3-day meeting was his 417th crusade. From 1949 to 2005, Graham preached in person to more than 210 million people around the world. This is a photo of Billy Graham from that final crusade that he did. Hurricane Katrina, a Category 5 hurricane, hit the Louisiana and Mississippi coast in August of 2005. Overall, at least 1,245 people died as a result of the hurricane. On December 18th, 2019, Donald Trump became the third president in U.S. history to be impeached. So we said Andrew Johnson was impeached, Bill Clinton was impeached, then Donald Trump was impeached. He was later acquitted by the Senate when there were not enough votes to remove him from office. All right, we're going to look now for a few minutes at a great American hero, Nancy Schaefer. She's one of my favorite people. I would say of the last 20 years or more, she is my favorite person in politics because of what a brave, heroic woman she was. Nancy Schaefer served in the Georgia State Senate from 2004 to 2008. During her time in office, she was committed to exposing corruption within government agencies. She is best known today for her 2007 document, The Corrupt Business of Child Protective Services. The document explains that as a result of the Adoption and Safe Families Act, signed into law by President Bill Clinton in 1997, CPS was abusing its authority, removing children from their non-abusive parents without giving the parents due process as required by the Constitution. The Adoption and Safe Families Act stipulates that government funding for CPS is contingent on the number of children that CPS social workers place in foster care, essentially establishing a quota system for social workers. Schaefer discovered that because funding depends on social workers taking children away from their parents, this leads the agency to have a vested interest in concluding parents guilty of abuse, even when little or no evidence exists. Schaefer reported that the agency commonly adopts an adversarial, guilty until proven innocent attitude towards parents that are accused. The situation had gotten so bad in Georgia that Schaefer likened CPS to the Gestapo, the secret police of Nazi Germany. Schaefer argued that what CPS was doing was unconstitutional and amounted to legalized kidnapping. Schaefer believed that CPS should be abolished and that abuse allegations against parents should be investigated by police officers rather than by social workers with no law enforcement training. Since 2007, Schaefer has been hailed by wrongfully accused families all over America as a heroic whistleblower. Unfortunately, Schaefer's warnings have largely been ignored, and the kind of injustice she encountered in Georgia continues to be common all across America. 3 years after Schaefer published her expose of CPS, she was murdered in her home, and the questions surrounding her murder have never been answered to this day. This is a picture of Nancy Schaefer. A very brave, very remarkable woman. All right, so we've been talking a lot about the civil rights movement. We're going to look now at the question, what does the civil rights movement look like in our generation? And we're going to look a little bit at Alveda King, who's the niece of Martin Luther King Jr. I think she has some really helpful things to say about this subject. So there's no question that the lives of black Americans are better today in many ways compared to what that life was like 50 years ago or 60 years ago. Schools are integrated, more economic opportunities exist, black actors and actresses are no longer relegated to stereotypical bit roles in Hollywood films. However, remaining challenges still exist. Alveda King, the niece of the late Martin Luther King Jr., has described the movement to end abortion, the civil rights movement of our generation. And this is a picture of Alveda King. We're going to talk a lot about her during this section. In 1973, the U.S. Supreme Court legalized abortion on demand in its landmark case, Roe v. Wade. Since then, Planned Parenthood, the nation's largest abortion provider, has organized a disproportionate number of abortion clinics in poor minority neighborhoods. Margaret Sanger, who founded Planned Parenthood in 1948, was a racist who once stated that one of her goals was to eradicate the Negro population. Since the legalization of abortion in 1973, Sanger's goal is slowly becoming a reality. Approximately 15.5 million abortions have taken place within the black community. Minority women constitute only about 13% of the female population, ages 15 to 44 in the United States, but they account for approximately 36% of the abortions, so they're 3 times more likely to get an abortion. According to the Guttmacher Institute, the research arm of Planned Parenthood, black women are more than 5 times as likely as white women to have an abortion. On average, 1,876 black babies are aborted every day in the United States. Catholic writer Michael Novak has calculated, quote, since the number of current living blacks in the U.S. is 36 million, the missing 16 million represents an enormous loss, for without abortion, America's black community would now number 52 million persons. It would be 36% larger than it is. Abortion has swept through the black community like a scythe, cutting down every 4th member. Unfortunately, many elected officials continue to defend abortion. For example, in the 1990s, Congress twice tried to ban partial birth abortion, a procedure where a full-term baby is partly delivered from the womb before being killed. But President Bill Clinton twice vetoed the ban. So Bill Clinton tried to make sure that it was possible for partially born babies to still be killed. When President Barack Obama was an Illinois senator, the Senate voted on a bill that would provide life-saving support to babies who survived botched abortions. And Obama was the only senator to vote against the bill. So Obama said that if a baby survives an abortion, their life should not be saved. They should be left to die. Which is really sad. Alveda King, who has worked for many decades for the pro-life Catholic organization Priests for Life, has articulated the problem very well. And this is her quote, abortion and racism are evil twins, born of the same lie. Where racism now hides its face in public, abortion is accomplishing the goals of which racism only once dreamed. Together, abortionists are destroying humanity at large, and the black community in particular. All right, so that just shows that as much progress has been made in America, some tremendous challenges still exist. So that's a look at U.S. history for the last, from the very beginning, 1776, until this year. If you guys are interested in getting this packet, just let me know and I'll get you a copy of it, and I'll send you the videos that go along with this packet. Thanks so much, guys. I really enjoy sharing this information with you all. I hope it's been helpful. I hope you've learned a lot. If you have questions, let me know. God bless you guys. Thanks.